The first bullet didn't sound like a gunshot. It sounded like the sky cracking open, followed immediately by the weeping crescendo of a million shards of tempered glass raining down onto the marble floor. "Get up, Sophia, move." Alina didn't wait for the 7-year-old to process the chaos. She grabbed the girl by the back of her silk pajamas, hauling her off the rug just as a spray of automatic fire chewed through the spot where Sophia had been playing with her dolls seconds before. The noise was a physical thing, a concussive slap against the eardrums that turned the air into a pressurized wave of terror. "Alina," Sophia screamed, her voice thin and high, piercing through the thunder of the assault rifles echoing from the atrium below. "Don't look back. Do not look back," Alina commanded, her voice dropping into a register she hadn't used in years. Cold, authoritative, lethal. She didn't guide the child, she dragged her. They skidded around the corner of the grand hallway, Alina's socks slipping on the polished limestone. Below them, the penthouse was being dissected. The sickening crunch of wood splintering and the heavy thud of boots on the stairs signaled that the perimeter was gone. The security team wasn't shouting anymore. That meant they were dead. Alina shoved Sophia toward the heavy oak bookshelf at the end of the corridor. Her hands, usually steady when pouring tea or braiding hair, shook violently as she clawed at the spine of the faux antique copy of Dante's Inferno *. Click. The hydraulic hiss of the hidden mechanism was too slow, far too slow. "I want my daddy," Sophia wailed, grabbing at Alina's cardigan. Tears streaked the girl's face, mixing with the dust kicking up from the pulverized drywall down the hall. "Your father is busy," Alina snapped, shoving the bookshelf as it swung outward, revealing the dark, steel maw of the panic room. "Get in. There is water, there is a blanket. You curl up in the corner and you put your hands over your ears. Do you understand me?" "You're coming too." "I can't." Alina looked back down the hallway. Shadows were dancing against the wall, elongated by the muzzle flashes erupting from the stairwell. They were close. If she went inside, the door would take 10 seconds to seal. If they breached the hall before then, the room would become a tomb. She had to stay out to manually trip the emergency seal. "Go." Alina used a strength she shouldn't have possessed, picking the child up and throwing her onto the panic room's cot. Sophia scrambled to her knees, reaching out, her small fingers grasping at the air. "Alina, no." Alina slammed her hand against the red panel on the inside of the door frame. "I promise I'll be right here when you open it. Count to 1,000, Sophia. Start now." The steel slab began to slide shut, cutting off the girl's terrified scream. Alina watched the gap narrow, 2 feet, 1 foot darkness. Thunk, the magnetic seals engaged. Silence for a heartbeat. Then the smell hit her, cordite, sulfur, and the copper tang of blood. Alina spun around, her back pressed against the fake bookshelf, her chest heaving. She scanned the hallway, her eyes darting to the antique vase on the console table. It was heavy, useless against a gun, but it was all she had. She grabbed it, her knuckles white. A shadow detached itself from the smoke at the top of the stairs. It moved with the predatory grace of a panther, ignoring the debris raining from the ceiling. A man, tall, broad, and radiating a violence so palpable it felt like heat. Lorenzo Vitale. He was covered in blood. It soaked the left side of his crisp white dress shirt, turning the expensive fabric into a jagged crimson map. He didn't look injured. The blood wasn't his. His dark hair was wild, plastering to his forehead with sweat, and his eyes, usually a guarded, icy blue, were entirely black, dilated with adrenaline and rage. He raised the Glock 19 in his right hand. He didn't hesitate. He didn't assess. He leveled the barrel directly at the center of Alina's chest. "Where is she?" Lorenzo roared, the sound tearing out of his throat like a growl. He didn't lower the weapon. His finger tightened on the trigger, taking up the slack. "Where is my daughter?" Alina froze. She saw the calculation in his eyes. He saw a woman standing by a hidden door in the middle of an ambush. In his world, there were no coincidences. To him, she wasn't the nanny right now. She was the insider who had unlocked the gates. "She's safe," Alina shouted, raising her empty hands, letting the vase shatter on the floor. "The panic room. I put her in the panic room." Lorenzo took 2 long strides, closing the distance until the muzzle of the gun pressed hard against her sternum, right over her heart. The heat radiating off the barrel burned through her blouse. "Open it," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "Open it and show me, or I will paint this wall with your brains." "I can't." Alina stared up into his face, refusing to flinch. This was the dawn of the vital crime family, the man who owned the city's politicians and its ports. He was death incarnate, and he was unraveling. "I hit the emergency seal. It's on a time lock. 20 minutes. Not even you can open it." Lorenzo stared at her, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was making his hand tremble just slightly. "You locked her in." "To save her from them." Alina gestured wildly toward the stairwell. As if on cue, a fresh burst of gunfire erupted from the floor below, significantly louder. They had cleared the landing. They were coming up to the penthouse level. Lorenzo's eyes darted to the panic room door, then back to Alina. The murderous intent didn't leave his gaze, but it shifted. He grabbed her by the throat, not to choke, but to control, slamming her back against the bookshelf. "Who are you working for?" he demanded, his face inches from hers. She could smell the gunpowder on his skin and the expensive scotch on his breath. "The Russians, the Greeks. Who paid you to open the service elevator?" "I didn't open anything," Alina choked out, clawing at his wrist. His grip was iron. "I was making warm milk. I heard the glass break." "Liar." He pressed the gun harder, bruising her skin. "My security system doesn't fail. It is bypassed. You are the only new variable in this house." "Check the logs later, you idiot," Alina screamed, fear giving way to a sudden, blinding anger. "Shoot me if you want, but right now there are men with assault rifles 10 seconds away from turning this hallway into a kill box. Do you want to kill the nanny, or do you want to defend your daughter's door?" The insult hung in the air. No one spoke to Lorenzo Vitale like that, not if they wanted to keep their tongue. For a second, she thought he would pull the trigger just for the insolence. Then, a heavy boot kicked open the double doors at the far end of the hallway. Lorenzo moved instantly. The hand on her throat released and shoved her violently downward. Down. Alina hit the floor hard, sliding on the debris just as the air above her head snapped with the passage of bullets. Pop, 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 pop. Lorenzo returned fire, his motions fluid and practiced. He fired 2 double taps, moving toward the cover of a marble pillar. A man in tactical gear at the end of the hall jerked and crumpled, sliding down the doorframe. But there were more. Shadowy figures were filling the corridor, moving with military precision. "Get behind me," Lorenzo barked, not looking back. He ejected a magazine and slapped a fresh one in with a speed that blurred the eye. Alina scrambled on her hands and knees, crawling behind the pillar where Lorenzo stood. She looked at the dead man down the hall. He wasn't wearing a mask. He had a tattoo on his neck, a black sun with a serpent winding through it. Alina's blood ran cold, colder than it had when Lorenzo held the gun to her heart. She knew that mark. "Lorenzo," she whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop it. He fired again, suppressed rage in every shot. "Shut up, stay down." "They aren't Russians," she said, her voice trembling with a realization that terrified her more than the bullets. "They're Solntsevskaya Bratva, but that tattoo, that's the Volkov splinter cell." Lorenzo froze for a fraction of a second, glancing down at her. His eyes narrowed. "How the hell do you know what a Volkov tattoo looks like?" Alina realized her mistake instantly. A nanny from Wisconsin shouldn't know the specific iconography of a fractured Russian syndicates. She shouldn't know the difference between a Bratva soldier and a mercenary. I watch documentaries," she lied, the excuse sounding pathetic even to her own ears. Lorenzo fired 2 more shots, keeping the attackers pinned. He looked back at her, and this time the suspicion in his eyes was sharper, deeper. It wasn't just rage anymore, it was intrigue. "We are going to have a very long conversation if we survive this, Nanny asterisk," he growled. A grenade, a flashbang, skittered across the floor, bouncing off the wall and landing 10 feet from them. "Cover," Lorenzo roared. He didn't run, he threw himself on top of her. His heavy body crushed her into the marble floor, shielding her with his own back. Elena curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut as the world turned white, and a deafening asterisk bang sucked the oxygen out of the hallway. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She felt Lorenzo flinch, a grunt of pain escaping his lips as shrapnel bit into the back of his suit jacket. He rolled off her instantly, shaking his head to clear the disorientation. He grabbed her arm, hauling her up. The hallway was filled with smoke. "Can you run?" he shouted over the ringing in her ears. "Yes," she gasped, though her legs felt like jelly. "The panic room is sealed. We can't stay here. We're fish in a barrel." He looked at the window at the end of the hall, the one that led to the fire escape, currently shattered and raining glass. "We have to go up to the roof. The chopper is there." "What about Sophia?" Elena cried, resisting his pull. "We can't leave her." "The room is impenetrable," Lorenzo said, his voice hard. "But if we stay outside it, they will kill us, and then they will spend all night drilling through that door. We have to draw them away. Now move." He didn't give her a choice. He clamped his hand around her wrist and sprinted toward the service stairs, dragging her into the smoke. Elena ran. She ran because the men with the sun and serpent tattoos were behind them. She ran because the man pulling her was the only thing keeping her alive. But as they burst onto the stairwell, climbing toward the roof, Elena's mind wasn't on the bullets whizzing past their heels. It was on the look Lorenzo had given her. He knew, or at least he suspected. If the assassins didn't kill her, Lorenzo Vitale would tear her apart piece by piece until he found the truth. And the truth was far more dangerous than any gun. She had come to this house to hide. But tonight, the one thing she couldn't afford to be was found. "Keep your head down," Lorenzo shouted, kicking open the roof access door. The cold night wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the sound of sirens far below. They stepped out onto the roof, and Elena stopped dead. The helicopter wasn't there. Instead, standing by the edge of the helipad, silhouetted against the city lights, was a man in a bespoke suit, smoking a cigarette. He turned as they emerged, a smile cutting across his face. "Evening, Lorenzo," the man called out, his voice smooth, accented. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Lorenzo stiffened, pushing Elena behind his back. "Markov." Elena peered around Lorenzo's bloodied shoulder. She felt the bile rise in her throat. She didn't just know the tattoos, she knew the face. The man smiled wider, his eyes locking onto Elena. "Hello, Mishka asterisk," the man whispered. "Did you think you could run forever?" Lorenzo turned his head slowly, looking at Elena. The betrayal in his eyes was absolute. "You know him?" Lorenzo asked, his voice deadly quiet. Elena opened her mouth, but no words came out. The past hadn't just caught up to her, it had surrounded her. "She should," Markov laughed, dropping his cigarette and crushing it under his heel. "She's my wife." The wind on the helipad whipped Elena's hair across her face, blinding her for a split second, but nothing could obscure the devastating weight of Lorenzo's stare. It was heavier than the gun he still gripped in his hand, colder than the night air above the city. "Wife," Lorenzo repeated. The word didn't sound like a question, it sounded like a verdict. Markov laughed, a low, grating sound that vibrated through the tension. "Technically, the paperwork is still pending annulment. Isn't that right, Elena? Or did you burn those papers too when you set fire to my villa?" Lorenzo's gaze snapped back to Markov. The sound of sirens wailed from the streets far below, rising like a chaotic tide. The extraction helicopter Lorenzo had summoned was cresting the nearby skyline, its searchlight sweeping the roof. "I don't have time for this," Lorenzo growled. He looked at Alina, his eyes devoid of the warmth they had held only hours ago. "Get in the chopper." "Lorenzo, listen to me," Alina started, reaching for him. He recoiled as if she were contagious. "I said, get in, unless you want to stay with him." Alina looked back at Markov. The Russian stood relaxed, hands in his pockets, watching them with the patience of a predator who knew the hunt was long. "Go on, Mishka Asterisk. Run with your new master. It makes catching you so much sweeter." The helicopter touched down, the rotor wash deafening. Lorenzo grabbed Leo, who was trembling and silent, shielding the boy's head as he ducked toward the open door. He didn't check to see if Alina was following. He knew she had no choice. Alina scrambled into the leather seat opposite them, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. As the chopper lifted off, banking sharply away from the burning penthouse, she caught one last glimpse of Markov. He waved. The flight was suffocating. Lorenzo sat in the shadows of the cabin, Leo asleep against his chest, or pretending to be. Lorenzo's hand rested protectively on the boy's back, but his eyes were fixed on Alina. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just dissected her. She looked down at her hands. They were stained with soot and dried blood, not hers. She had shot a man tonight. She had cleared a path for Lorenzo and his son. She had acted on instinct, an instinct she had spent 3 years trying to bury under pastel cardigans and nanny etiquette. When the helicopter finally descended, it wasn't toward the city, but toward the dense, forested hills to the north. The estate that came into view was a fortress of stone and iron, surrounded by high walls topped with floodlights. As soon as they landed, Lorenzo moved with terrifying efficiency. He handed a groggy Leo to an older woman waiting by the back entrance, the housekeeper, Marta. "Is he hurt?" Marta asked, eyes widening at the blood on Lorenzo's shirt. "Take him to his room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Especially not her," Lorenzo said, jerking his chin toward Alina. Alina flinched. "Lorenzo, please, Leo needs." "Leo needs to be safe from the woman who lied to get into his bed," Lorenzo snapped. As soon as the boy was gone, the facade of control shattered. Lorenzo grabbed Alina's upper arm, his grip bruising, and dragged her down the hallway. He didn't take her to the guest quarters. He marched her into his study, a cavernous room smelling of mahogany and whiskey, and shoved her. Alina stumbled back, hitting the wall hard. Before she could regain her balance, Lorenzo was there. He pinned her, his forearms bracketing her head, trapping her against the dark wood paneling. His body was a wall of heat and fury, pressing close enough that she could feel the erratic thrum of his pulse. "Start talking," he snarled, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "And if I catch a whiff of a lie, I hand you back to Markov myself." "I am not his spy," Alina gasped, pressing her palms flat against the wall behind her. "I ran from him. I've been running for 3 years." "Markov called you his wife." "I was 18. It was a debt payment, not a marriage. My father sold me to cover his gambling losses. I escaped the night of the wedding." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, searching her face. "A terrified runaway doesn't know how to field strip a Glock, Alina. A nanny doesn't know tactical evasion." "I learned," she cried out. "You think I could survive hiding from the Bratva by staying soft. I learned to shoot so I wouldn't have to go back. I learned to fight so I wouldn't be a victim again." Lorenzo leaned in closer, his nose brushing against hers. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne filled her senses. The proximity was dizzying. Despite the fear, despite the accusation, the electric current that had always hummed between them spiked violently. "That explains the gun," Lorenzo whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silky register. But it doesn't explain the elevator. Alina's breath hitched. When the power was cut, Lorenzo continued, his dark eyes boring into hers, you manually overrode the lockdown on the service elevator. You punched in a code. My asterisk code. A sequence only my head of security and my blood relatives know. How did you have it? This was the damning piece of evidence. The gun could be explained by trauma. The code implied espionage. Alina swallowed hard. I heard you. Bullshit. I heard you, she insisted, her voice trembling. 2 weeks ago, you were on the phone with Dante in the library. You were changing the protocols. You said the numbers out loud. 74190. I have a memory for numbers. It's just something I can do. Lorenzo stared at her, his chest heaving slightly. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her. The way she had thrown her body over Leo's when the first explosion rocked the building, that wasn't the action of an assassin. But the betrayal of knowing Markov, the monster of Moscow, had a claim on her was a bitter pill. He looked at her lips, parted and trembling, and for a second the rage morphed into something darker, hungrier. He hated that she was beautiful even now, with soot on her cheek and terror in her eyes. He hated that she had saved his son, making him indebted to a woman he couldn't trust. You're a liability, Lorenzo murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, applying just enough pressure to be a threat. Markov will tear this city apart to get you, and now he knows you're with me. I'll leave, Alina whispered. Give me a car and I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. No, the refusal was instant. Why, if you don't trust me? Because you're the bait now, Lorenzo said coldly, pulling back. The loss of his body heat left her shivering. Markov wants you. If I let you run, he'll catch you, and then he'll come for me anyway because I humiliated him tonight. The only way I end this war is if I control the pieces on the board. And you, Mishka Asterisk, are the queen. He held out his hand. Phone, passport now. Alina hesitated, her hand going to the pocket of her ruined cardigan. Lorenzo, don't do this. Give them to me. His voice brooked no argument. Slowly, she withdrew her battered smartphone and her passport, the fake one, under the name Alina Rix. Lorenzo took them, slipping them into his jacket pocket. You are not to leave this house. You are not to contact anyone. You are not to go near Leo until I decide you aren't going to sell us out. I saved his life, Alina screamed, the injustice finally breaking through her fear. Tears pricked her eyes. I took a bullet grazed to the arm for him. Doesn't that count for anything? Lorenzo paused at the door. He looked back, his expression unreadable, a mask of stone. It's the only reason you're still breathing, he said. He walked out, and the heavy oak door slammed shut with the finality of a prison cell closing. Alina listened to the click of the lock turning from the outside. She slid down the wall until she hit the floor, burying her face in her knees. She had escaped the fire, but she had walked straight into the ice. She was trapped in a billionaire's fortress, hunted by a Russian warlord, and held captive by a man whose touch she craved as much as she feared. She pulled up the sleeve of her cardigan to look at the graze on her arm. It was stinging, angry, and red. She pressed her thumb against it, using the sharp pain to ground herself. I won't break, she whispered to the empty room. I didn't break for Markov. I won't break for you, Lorenzo. But as she remembered the heat of his body pressing her against the wall, she wasn't entirely sure if that was a promise or a lie. The lock clicked open at dawn. It was a singular mechanical sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent corridor, signaling that her shift, her sentence, was beginning. Alina didn't sleep. She had spent the night sitting by the window, watching the moonlight glint off the barbed wire topping the perimeter walls. The estate was a fortress, a modernized castle of stone and steel designed to keep the world out, or, in her case, to keep the prize in. She showered quickly, scrubbing her skin until it turned pink, trying to wash away the phantom sensation of Lorenzo's hand on her throat, the heat of his body against hers. It was impossible. He had branded her without using fire. She dressed in the modest, nondescript clothes she had packed in her frantic escape, a gray sweater and dark trousers. She needed to be invisible. She needed to be just the nanny. When she stepped into the hallway, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was a guard, a mountain of a man with a scar slicing through his eyebrow. He didn't speak. He simply gestured with a tilt of his chin toward the east wing. The walk to the nursery felt like a perp walk. Every 10 feet, she spotted them, the cameras. They were sleek, black domes mounted discreetly in the cornices of the ceiling, their unblinking eyes tracking her movement. She wasn't just working for Lorenzo, she was a specimen in his jar. The nursery was larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with her sister back in Queens. It was a wonderland of muted pastels, hand-painted murals of whimsical forests, and enough toys to stock a department store. But the air was stale, untouched. It felt less like a playroom and more like a museum exhibit. In the center of the room, sitting on a sprawling Persian rug, was Sophia. Lorenzo's daughter was 5 years old, with hair like spun dark chocolate and eyes that mirrored her father's, intense, probing, and far too old for her face. She was meticulously dressed in a stiff velvet dress, clutching a headless doll. "Hi, Sophia," Elena said softly, sinking to her knees to bring herself to the child's eye level. "I'm Elena." Sophia didn't blink. She stared at Elena's neck, where the pulse was fluttering visibly. "Are you the new one?" Sophia asked. Her voice was small, brittle. "The new nanny, yes. The last one left because she was scared of the ghosts," Sophia said matter-of-factly, turning her attention back to the headless doll. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "There aren't any ghosts here, sweetie." Sophia looked up, her gaze piercing. "Papa says ghosts are just people who haven't realized they're dead yet, but the men outside, they make people into ghosts." Elena's heart twisted. This child was living in a silo of violence, insulated by wealth but suffocated by the reality of her father's business. She reached out, hesitating, then picked up a wooden block. "Well, I'm not afraid of ghosts, and I'm pretty good at building castles. Do you want to help me?" For the next 3 hours, Elena worked to dismantle the wall around the girl. It was slow going. Sophia was guarded, conditioned to mistrust, but eventually the allure of play won out. They built a sprawling fortress of blocks. For a moment, amidst the laughter and the toppling wooden towers, Elena forgot about Markov. She forgot about the gun Lorenzo carried under his jacket. Then she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck. Elena froze, a blue block in her hand. She slowly turned her head toward the corner of the room, near the ceiling. The camera lens zoomed in with a faint, electronic whir. He was watching. She didn't know where he was, in an office, a car, or behind a bank of monitors in the basement. But she could feel his heavy, possessive gaze as surely as if he were standing behind her. She straightened her posture, smoothing her hair. Was he analyzing her interaction with Sophia, or was he looking at the curve of her waist as she bent over the toys? "Elena," Sophia tugged at her sleeve. "You stopped." "I'm sorry," Elena whispered, forcing a smile that felt tight on her face. I thought I heard something." "It's just the house," Sophia said, lowering her voice. "The house breathes. Papa listens to it." By the time the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the nursery floor, Elena was exhausted. The mental toll of performing normalcy while terrified was heavier than any physical labor. A maid, a severe woman named Marta who looked like she chewed lemons for recreation, arrived to take Sophia for her dinner. "You are dismissed to your quarters," Marta said, not meeting Elena's eyes. "Don Lorenz requires the staff to remain in their designated zones after 6. "Is he home?" Elena asked before she could stop herself. Marta paused, her hand gripping Sophia's small shoulder. "The Don is always where he needs to be. You would do well to worry about your own location, Miss Elena." Elena walked back to her room, the escort of guards swapping out at each corridor intersection. The security was suffocating. Yet, as she walked, a perverse sense of relief washed over her. The biometric locks, the thermal sensors in the garden, the armed men at every gate. It was a prison, yes, but it was an impenetrable one. Markov, the man who had hunted her across 2 continents, the man who had burned her life to ash, couldn't get in here. Lorenzo was a monster, but he was a more powerful monster. For the first time in months, she felt a sliver of safety. She was a bird in a cage, but the cat couldn't reach her. She reached her room, a lavish suite that was starkly impersonal. She pushed the door open, yearning for the oblivion of sleep. She needed to recharge. Tomorrow, she would have to face Lorenzo again, and she needed all her wits to survive the magnetic pull he exerted on her. She closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. She pushed off the door and walked toward the bed. The maid's service had been in. The bed was turned down, the Egyptian cotton sheets crisp and inviting, the pillows fluffed to perfection. Elena reached for the hem of her sweater to pull it off, but her hands froze mid-motion. There, resting precisely in the center of the snow-white pillow, was a smudge of darkness. Elena took a step closer, her breath hitching in her throat. It wasn't a smudge, it was an object. She approached the bed as if it contained a bomb. Her trembling fingers hovered over the pillow. It was a flower, but not a rose from the garden. It was made of black paper, expertly folded, sharp angles, precise creases. A black origami lily. The air left the room. The world tilted on its axis. Elena stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream that tore at her throat. No, it's impossible. The black lily was Markov's calling card. He used to leave them for her when he was courting her, before the courtship turned into a hunt. He left them to show affection. Later, he left them to show he had been inside her apartment while she slept, to show ownership. To the grave, he had told her once, "I will own you to the grave." She spun around, scanning the room frantically. The windows were sealed. The door had been locked. The security cameras outside were unblinking. Lorenzo's fortress was supposed to be impenetrable, the most sophisticated security money could buy. And yet, the flower sat on her pillow. It wasn't just a threat, it was a message. I am here. Markov wasn't outside the walls. He wasn't watching from a distance. Someone inside this house, one of the guards, the maids, the kitchen staff, perhaps even someone in Lorenzo's inner circle, had placed it there. The safety she had felt seconds ago shattered into a million jagged shards. She wasn't safe. She was trapped in a locked box with a traitor. Elena backed into the corner of the room, sliding down until she hit the floor, her eyes fixed on the black paper flower. It looked like a spider waiting to strike. She was in the belly of the beast, and the devil had just walked in the front door. The door to her bedroom burst open, hitting the stopper with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Elena didn't scream. She didn't have the breath left in her lungs. She remained huddled in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest, her gaze locked on the black paper origami sitting on the pristine white duvet. Lorenzo DeSantis filled the doorway. He was half-dressed, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal the corded muscle of his forearms. He held a Sig Sauer P226 at his side, the barrel pointed at the floor, his finger hovering over the guard. His eyes swept the room, the sealed windows, the empty closet, the trembling woman on the floor, before landing on the bed. He moved with the silence of a predator, holstering the weapon at the small of his back as he stalked toward the pillow. He picked up the black flower between 2 fingers, examining it with a clinical detachment that terrified Elena more than his rage would have. Markov, he said. It wasn't a question. How did he get in? Elena's voice was a fractured whisper. You said I was safe. You said this place was a fortress. Lorenzo crushed the paper flower in his fist, reducing the delicate folds to trash. Fortresses are only as strong as the men guarding them, and it seems I have a rat in my walls." He turned to her, his expression hardening into granite. There was no pity in his eyes, only calculation. He walked over, extending a hand. She hesitated, looking at the calluses on his palm, then up at his unforgiving face. "Stand up, Alina." She took his hand. He pulled her up with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of her again, bringing her flush against his chest. The heat radiating off him was overwhelming, smelling of expensive scotch and gun oil. "He wants you to be afraid," Lorenzo murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "He put this here to make you cower, to make you run out of the house and straight into his arms." "It's working," she admitted, tears stinging her eyes. "I can't stay here, Lorenzo. He can reach me anywhere." "No," Lorenzo's grip on her waist tightened, turning painful. "He reached you because I allowed complacency. That ends tonight. We are not hiding in the shadows, waiting for the next flower to appear on your pillow. We are going on the offensive." Alina pulled back, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The Benevento Charity Gala is tonight. Every major player in the city will be there. Rivals, politicians, and the snakes hiding in the grass." Lorenzo released her, walking to the wardrobe. He threw the doors open. "If Markov has a mole inside my house, then he knows our movements. He expects me to lock you down in the panic room." "Which is exactly what you should do." "And let him dictate the game?" "No." Lorenzo turned, his dark eyes flashing. "We are going to the gala, and you are going to wear the most expensive dress in the room. You won't be entering as my nanny, Alina. You'll be entering as my fiancé." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. "You're using me as bait." "I am using you to draw out the poison," he corrected, though he didn't deny it. "Markov is arrogant. If he sees you on my arm, flaunted before the city, wearing my ring, he will lose his composure. He will make a mistake, and when he does, I will gut him." "I can't do that. I can't smile and pretend while a killer is hunting me." Lorenzo stepped into her personal space again, cupping her jaw with his large hand. He forced her to look at him. "You can, and you will, because the alternative is waiting in this room wondering which one of the maids is going to slip poison into your tea. Out there, in the light, you are mine, and I do not let anyone touch what is mine." 3 hours later, Alina barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The dress Lorenzo had procured was a weapon in itself. A floor-length sheath of crimson silk that clung to every curve of her body like a second skin. It was backless, dipping dangerously low, exposing the vulnerable line of her spine. Lorenzo stood behind her, his tuxedo impeccable, his presence suffocating. He opened a velvet box, revealing a necklace that made her gasp. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a statement. A choker of tiered diamonds dripping down toward her collarbone like frozen tears. "Lift your hair," he commanded. She obeyed, her hands trembling. Lorenzo fastened the heavy clasp at the nape of her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, cold and rough against the silk. He leaned in, his lips brushing the sensitive spot just below her ear. "Beautiful," he whispered, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold metal. "Now, everyone will know you belong to the DeSantis family." "It feels like a collar," she murmured, looking at the reflection of the diamonds. Lorenzo met her gaze in the glass. "Perhaps it is." He grabbed her hand, sliding a massive, emerald-cut diamond ring onto her finger. It was heavy, ostentatious, and undeniably possessive. "Let's go, Kara **. The wolves are waiting." The drive to the gala was silent. The armored limousine felt like a hearse. When they arrived, the flashbulbs were blinding. Lorenzo exited first, buttoning his jacket, before extending a hand to help her out. The moment her heel touched the pavement, the roar of the crowd intensified. "Head up," Lorenzo hissed through a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look at me, only me." He guided her up the red carpet, his hand firm on the small of her back. To the cameras, it was a loving touch. To Alina, it was a steerage, a reminder that she couldn't run. Reporters shouted questions about the mystery woman, about the engagement, but Lorenzo ignored them all, sweeping her into the grand ballroom. The venue was dripping with opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the city's elite. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts through the crowd. But underneath the perfume and the champagne, Alina smelled danger. Every laugh sounded sharp, every glance felt assessing. "Lorenzo," a voice boomed. A heavy-set man with a scarred eyebrow approached, holding a glass of brandy. "I didn't think you'd make it. And who is this stunning creature?" "My fiancé, Alina," Lorenzo said smoothly, his arm tightening around her waist. "Alina, this is Don Morty." Alina forced a smile, her lips trembling. "A pleasure." "Fiancé," Morty's eyes narrowed, flickering over the diamonds at her throat. "You move fast, DeSantis. I thought you were married to the business." "Priorities change," Lorenzo said, his tone icy. "Excuse us, I promised my bride a dance." He swept her away before Morty could respond, pulling her onto the center of the dance floor. The orchestra began a slow, melancholic waltz. Lorenz pulled her close, his body a wall of hard muscle against her softness. "You're doing well," he murmured, his hand sliding up her bare back. "Morty is already making calls. The word is spreading." "I feel like I'm going to be sick," Alina whispered, clutching his shoulder. "Breathe. I have men at every exit. I have snipers on the balcony. You are the safest person in this room." Alina tried to believe him. She tried to lose herself in the rhythm of the waltz, in the hypnotic darkness of Lorenzo's eyes. For a moment, the world narrowed down to just the two of them. The way he held her, possessive and dominant, made her body react in ways that betrayed her fear. She felt a spark of heat in her belly, a confusing attraction to the man who was using her as a shield. Then she turned her head. The crowd blurred as they spun. Faces became smears of color, until one face stopped moving. Standing near the heavy velvet drapes of the eastern exit, half hidden by a pillar, was a waiter holding a tray of empty flutes. He wasn't looking at the tray, he was looking at her. The left side of his face was smooth, but when he turned slightly, the light caught the jagged, distinctive burn scar running from his ear to his jaw. He smiled, a cold, dead twisting of lips that she had seen in her nightmares for 3 years. "Markov." Alina gasped, her foot stumbling. She gripped Lorenzo's lapel so hard her knuckles turned white. "He's here," she choked out, terror seizing her throat. "Lorenzo, he's here." Lorenzo stopped dancing, stabilizing her instantly. "Where?" His voice was a whip-crack of command. "The waiter by the east pillar, the one with the tray." Lorenzo spun her around, shielding her body with his own as his hand went instinctively to the gun concealed beneath his jacket. His eyes scanned the location she pointed to. "There is no waiter there, Alina," Lorenzo said, his voice flat. "He was just there. He smiled at me. He has the scar, the burn mark." Alina tried to pull away to look again, but Lorenzo held her fast. "Alina, look." He forced her to turn. By the pillar, there was nothing but a potted fern and an elderly couple chatting. "He moved. He saw you looking," Alina insisted, panic rising in her chest. "He's in the room, Lorenzo. We have to leave." Lorenzo's expression didn't soften. Instead, a mask of cold irritation slid over his features. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut her deeper than a knife. "I have eyes on every member of the staff. My security team vetted everyone. There is no one with a burn scar on the payroll tonight." "He isn't on the payroll. He's Markov. He found a way in just like the bedroom." "Stop it," Lorenzo snapped, his grip on her arm bruising. People were starting to stare. The happy facade was cracking. "You are hysterical. I told you I checked the perimeter. No one gets in without me knowing." "You're wrong." "Am I?" Lorenzo's eyes were black pits. Or are you seeing ghosts because you are weak, because you are letting the fear rot your mind? Elena recoiled as if he had slapped her. I saw him. You saw a shadow, Lorenzo said, his tone dismissive, arrogant. He straightened his jacket, looking around the room to ensure their little scene hadn't cost him too much face. Pull yourself together, Elena. Do not embarrass me. If you run now, you prove to everyone here that you are nothing but a frightened child. He released her arm, leaving her cold and trembling in the middle of the dance floor. I'm going to get a drink, he said, turning his back on her. Stay here and smile. Elena watched him walk away, disappearing into the sea of black tuxedos. She stood alone under the glittering chandelier, the diamonds around her neck suddenly feeling less like a collar and more like a noose. She looked back at the pillar. The shadows seemed to ripple. Lorenzo was wrong. She wasn't crazy. But as she stood there, exposed and unprotected in the crowd, she realized the terrifying truth. The Don might be the most powerful man in the city, but his arrogance had just left the gate to the sheep pen wide open, and the wolf was already inside. The silence inside the armored SUV was heavier than the humid night air outside. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the tinted windows and blurring the neon lights of the city into elongated smears of red and blue. Lorenzo sat on the far side of the leather bench seat, nursing a tumbler of whiskey he'd poured from the car's crystal decanter. He hadn't looked at her since he dragged her out of the gala, his grip on her elbow bruisingly tight, whispering threats of dismissal if she ever caused a scene like that again. Elena stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. The diamonds around her neck felt icy against her skin. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear that had paralyzed her in the ballroom had distilled into something colder, sharper. It was a familiar sensation, one she hadn't felt in years, but it fit like a second skin. Adrenaline. She watched the side mirror. A black sedan had turned left when they did. It had changed lanes when they did. Lorenzo, she said softly. Not a word, he snapped, taking a sip of the amber liquid. His jaw was tight, a muscle feathering beneath the stubble. I am trying to calculate how much damage control I need to do because my nanny decided to hallucinate assassins in the middle of a charity ball. We are being followed. We are the Rossi family. We are always followed. It is the security detail. No, Elena said, her voice devoid of the tremulous quality it held 10 minutes ago. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto his. The security detail drives a cavalcade formation. That car is in our blind spot. It's been there for 3 miles. Lorenzo frowned, the glass pausing halfway to his lips. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that the doe-eyed girl who read bedtime stories was gone. In her place was someone focused, rigid, and waiting. He leaned forward to tap the partition glass to speak to the driver. Marco, check the... The world exploded. There was no sound at first, just a violent, bone-rattling concussive force as an SUV T-boned them from the right side. The armored plating groaned, metal screaming against metal. The heavy vehicle skidded sideways across the wet asphalt, spinning out of control before slamming into a concrete divider. Glass spiderwebbed, but didn't shatter. The decanter flew, drenching the interior in the smell of expensive alcohol. Elena was thrown against the door, her head cracking against the reinforced window. Darkness threatened to swallow her, but instinct clawed it back. She gasped, tasting copper. Lorenzo. He was slumped against the opposite door. Blood was already blooming on his white dress shirt, a jagged, dark stain spreading rapidly from his shoulder. The impact had sent a shard of something, metal or heavy plastic, straight into him. Marco, Lorenzo groaned, trying to reach for his holster, but his arm hung uselessly. He's gone, Elena said. She didn't need to check. Through the partition, she could see the driver's cabin was crushed like a tin can. Outside, tires screeched to a halt, doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement. Stay down, Lorenzo hissed, his face pale, sweat beading instantly on his forehead. He fumbled for his gun with his left hand, his movements sluggish. "Alina, get on the floor." She didn't move to the floor. She moved to the door handle. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" Lorenzo grit out, pain lacing his voice. "The locks are magnetic," she muttered, her eyes darting to the tactical layout of the street. "If they have an override, we're trapped in a coffin." As if on cue, the electronic lock clicked. The door on Lorenzo's side was wrenched open. A man in a tactical balaclava stood there, the muzzle of a suppressed submachine gun raising toward the Don's chest. Lorenzo raised his pistol, but he was too slow. The injury had delayed his reaction time by a fatal second. He saw the assassin's finger tighten on the trigger. He braced for the end. It didn't come. A blur of silk and fury launched across the car. Alina didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She moved with the terrifying fluidity of water. She drove the heel of her stiletto into the assassin's throat. The man gagged, stumbling back, his aim jerking skyward as a burst of bullets chewed up the car's ceiling. Before he could recover, Alina was on him. She grabbed the barrel of the gun, searing her palm, and twisted it with a leverage that defied her slender frame. Snap! The sound of the man's wrist breaking was audible over the rain. He dropped to his knees. Alina didn't pause. She spun behind him, wrapped the chain of her diamond necklace around his neck, and pulled. It was over in 3 seconds. The man went limp. Alina released him, caught the falling submachine gun, checked the magazine, and racked the slide. She scanned the perimeter. 2 more shadows were approaching from the rear vehicle. She raised the weapon. Pop, 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 pop. Controlled bursts, center mass. The 2 approaching figures dropped onto the wet asphalt. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the drumming rain and Lorenzo's ragged breathing. Alina stood in the rain, her gown torn at the thigh, her hair wild, holding a weapon of war as if it were an extension of her own arm. She checked the street one last time, ensuring no other threats were emerging, then turned back to the car. She dropped the gun on the passenger seat and scrambled inside, her demeanor shifting from executioner to medic in a heartbeat. "Let me see," she commanded. It wasn't a request. Lorenzo stared at her. He was in shock, but not just from the wound. He looked at the dead man by the door, a professional hitman, neutralized by a nanny in a ball gown, and then back at her. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Pressure," she said, ignoring him. She ripped the hem of her dress, the expensive silk shredding easily. She wadded it up and pressed it hard against the wound in his shoulder. "Hold this. Hard." He hissed in pain but obeyed. "Alina, that man, you broke his neck. He was going to kill you." She worked quickly, her hands covered in his blood. She found a leather belt on the floor, Marco's, perhaps, or luggage that had spilled, and looped it around his upper arm, high above the wound. "This is going to hurt," she warned. She cinched the makeshift tourniquet tight. Lorenzo roared, a guttural sound that was swallowed by the storm. His vision swam, gray spots dancing in front of his eyes. "The artery is nicked, but not severed," she diagnosed, checking his pupil dilation. "We need to move. The police will be here in 5 minutes or worse, the second wave." "Second wave," Lorenzo managed to choke out. "They always send a cleanup crew," she said darkly. "Can you walk?" "I think so." She hauled him up. She was deceptively strong. She draped his good arm over her shoulders and guided him out of the wreckage, steering them into the shadows of a narrow alleyway adjacent to the crash site. They moved through the darkness, away from the sirens wailing in the distance. Alina found a recessed loading dock behind an abandoned warehouse and eased him down against the brick wall. They were safe for the moment. Lorenzo slumped against the bricks, clutching his shoulder. The adrenaline was fading, leaving clarity in its wake. He watched her pace the small area, checking sightlines, listening for footsteps. She moved like a panther, silent, lethal, efficient. He realized then that he had never really seen her. He had seen a shy, desperate girl who needed a job. He had seen a body he wanted to possess, but he had not seen asterisk this. "Stop," Lorenzo said. His voice was weak but carried the command of the dawn. Alina stopped pacing. She stood with her back to him, looking out at the rain. Her shoulders rose and fell heavily. "Turn around." Slowly, she turned. The street lamp at the end of the alley cast her in silhouette, but he could see her face. The mask was gone. Her eyes were hard, ancient things. "You handled that weapon like you were born with it," Lorenzo said, wincing as he adjusted his leg. "You killed 3 men in under 10 seconds. You applied a tourniquet with military precision." Alina said nothing. She wiped a splatter of blood from her cheek. "A nanny doesn't know how to disarm a spec ops mercenary," Lorenzo continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "A frightened girl doesn't check for a second wave. Who are you?" "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I saved your life." "It matters," he snapped. He reached into his jacket with his good hand and pulled his own pistol, aiming it leveled at her chest. "Because right now, I don't know if I'm looking at my savior or a sleeper agent sent to finish the job." Alina looked at the gun. She didn't flinch. She looked tired. "If I wanted you dead, Lorenzo, I would have let that man pull the trigger." "Tell me the truth," he demanded. "No more lies, Alina, or whatever your name is." She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the rain. When she opened them, the resignation was palpable. The game was up. There was no going back to reading bedtime stories and pretending to be afraid of thunder. "Alina is my middle name," she said softly. "And the rest?" She took a step closer, right up to the barrel of his gun. "My name is Alina Maria Cortez." Lorenzo's eyes widened slightly. The name hit him like a physical blow. The Cortez cartel, the rulers of the Baja territory, the rivals who had been butchering Rossi shipments for a decade. "Cortez," he repeated, the name tasting like ash. "You are Hector Cortez's daughter." "I was," she corrected, "until I refused to marry the man he sold me to, until I burned down his warehouse to cover my escape. I've been running for 3 years." Lorenzo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The irony. I hired the daughter of my enemy to watch my children." "I am not your enemy, Lorenzo." "Aren't you?" He kept the gun trained on her heart. "Your father is a butcher. They say he trains his children before they can walk. To strip a rifle, to mix poisons, to silence a room." "He did," Alina admitted. Her gaze was unflinching. "He made me a weapon. He thought he could use me to expand his empire. But a weapon has no loyalty to the hand that wields it if that hand is cruel." She reached out and slowly, deliberately, placed her hand over the barrel of his gun, pushing it down until it pointed at the wet pavement. "I am not a spy," she whispered, leaning down so her face was inches from his. "I am a defector, and right now I am the only thing standing between you and the people who want to carve up your territory." Lorenzo looked at her. He saw the blood on her hands, blood she had spilled for him. He saw the fire in her eyes. 10 minutes ago, she was a liability, a sheep he had to protect. Now, he looked at the way she stood, balanced and ready to kill again if necessary. She wasn't a sheep. She was a wolf he had accidentally invited into his home. But as the sirens drew closer, Lorenzo realized something else. In a city full of jackals, a wolf was exactly what he needed. He holstered his gun. "Help me up," he said. Alina hesitated, then extended her hand. He took it. Her grip was iron. "We are not done with this conversation," Lorenzo muttered as he leaned his weight against her. "But for now, get me home, Alina." "Yes, sir," she said, reverting to the title, but the subservience was gone. As they stepped out into the rain, Lorenzo didn't look at her as a nanny or even as a lover. He looked at her as a loaded gun, and for the first time that night, He smiled grimly. He just had to make sure she was pointed in the right direction. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, mocking chime, revealing the sprawling expanse of the penthouse. It was usually a sanctuary of silence and glass, overlooking the glittering skyline of Chicago. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. Lorenzo limped out, his hand pressed against the hastily bandaged wound on his side. He didn't look at Alina. He didn't have to. He could feel her presence behind him, a ghost he had foolishly tried to domesticate. "Lock it," Lorenzo commanded, his voice devoid of the warmth that had begun to creep in over the last few weeks. Alina stepped into the foyer. "Lorenzo, I can explain." "I said lock it." She pressed the panel on the wall. The heavy steel bolts slammed home. The private elevator was disabled. The stairwell exits were sealed. They were alone. Lorenzo turned, his face a mask of cold fury. The adrenaline of the shootout had faded, replaced by a dull throb in his side and a sharper, agonizing twist in his chest. Betrayal. It tasted like ash. "The way you handled that gun," Lorenzo said, walking to the bar and pouring a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. "The tactical awareness, the double tap, that wasn't self-defense, Alina. That was muscle memory." Alina stood in the center of the room, her clothes stained with the grime of the alleyway and his blood. She didn't shrink away. "I did what I had to do to keep you alive." "To keep your asset alive," he corrected, spinning around. The glass shattered as he slammed it onto the marble counter. "Tell me his name." "Lorenzo." "Tell me," he roared, the sound echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You aren't just a nanny down on her luck. You act like a soldier. You move like an assassin. Which family? The Russos? The Greeks?" Alina lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with that same defiance he had seen in the alley. "Morty." The name hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Lorenzo laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Morty, of course." He shook his head, looking at the ceiling as if pleading with a cruel god. "I've been sleeping with the daughter of the man who ordered the hit on my brother." He drew his gun. Alina didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She just watched him, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't paint this room with your blood," Lorenzo whispered, stepping closer. The barrel of the weapon leveled at her heart. "You infiltrated my home. You touched my son. You made me." He cut himself off, refusing to admit the weakness. "You made me love you." "Because I hate him more than you do," Alina said softly. Lorenzo paused, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Words." "Not words, scars." Alina reached for the hem of her ruined shirt. Lorenzo tensed, but she simply pulled the fabric up, revealing her side. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. There, marred against her pale skin, was a brand. The crest of the Morty family burned into her flesh. It was old, jagged, and cruel. "He didn't send me," Alina said, dropping the shirt. "I ran. I changed my name. I took the job with you because you were the only man in the city powerful enough to scare him. I thought if I was under the roof of the great Lorenzo DeLuca, he wouldn't touch me." "You used me as a shield." "I used you as a fortress," she corrected. "But then, I stopped seeing the dawn. I started seeing the man." She took a step toward the gun. "If you want to kill me for my blood, do it. But know that the woman who saved your life tonight isn't a Morty. She's yours." Lorenzo stared at her. His mind was a war zone. Logic screamed that she was a liability, a genetic enemy who had deceived him for months. Instinct screamed that she was the only creature on Earth who understood the darkness inside him because she was born in it, just like him. He lowered the gun, but he didn't holster it. "You want to be mine?" Lorenzo asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Then you cannot be a shield. Shields are passive. Shields break." He closed the distance between them, grabbing her by the jaw. His grip was bruising, possessive. "I don't need a nanny, Alina. I have staff for that. I don't need a prisoner. I have cells for that." "What do you need?" she breathed, her hands clutching his lapels. I need a weapon. Lorenzo released her jaw and walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting. He spun the dial, the clicks loud in the silent room. He pulled out a black ledger and a satellite phone. Your father, Lorenzo said, turning back to her. He thinks you are missing, but after tonight's display, word will get back to him. He'll know you're with me. He'll think you're a hostage or a traitor. He'll come for us, Elena said. Let him come. Lorenzo tossed the satellite phone onto the coffee table. It slid across the glass surface, stopping at her hips. But we aren't going to wait for a siege. This ends tonight. He pointed to the phone. Call him. Elena's eyes widened slightly. And say what? Tell him you've infiltrated my operation. Tell him I'm wounded. Weak. Tell him the penthouse is vulnerable and you've unlocked the service elevator. You want to lure him here, she realized. I'm offering you an ultimatum, Elena, Lorenzo said, his eyes burning into hers. You can remain the victim, the runaway daughter hiding in the shadows. If you choose that, I will put you on a plane to nowhere, and you will never see me or my son again. He stepped closer, his body heat radiating against hers. Or, he whispered, you make that call, you bring him to our doorstep, and you help me butcher his empire piece by piece, starting with the head. You prove that you are not his daughter, but my queen. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. This was the precipice. Elena looked at the phone, then at Lorenzo. She saw the monster in him, the violence he was capable of. But she also saw the fierce protection, the man who would burn the world down for what was his. She had spent her life running from monsters. It was time to run with one. Elena picked up the phone. She didn't hesitate. She dialed the number she had memorized a lifetime ago. When the line clicked open, her voice changed. The softness vanished. The nanny was gone. Papa, she said, her voice trembling with a fake, terrified urgency. It's me, he's hurt, I have the codes. Lorenzo watched her, a dark smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching its mate bare her teeth. She gave the instructions, weaving a web of lies so convincing it chilled Lorenzo to the bone. She hung up and looked at him. He's coming, she said, 30 minutes. Good. Lorenzo moved to the weapons cabinet, unlocking the heavier arsenal. He pulled out a submachine gun and tossed it to her. She caught it with one hand, checking the magazine with a fluid, practiced motion. Leo is safe, she asked, referring to his son, currently at the safe house in the Hamptons. He is guarded by my best men, but he needs a mother, Elena, not a victim. He has a mother, she said, chambering around. The sound was a harsh asterisk clack in the quiet room. She walked over to Lorenzo, stopping inches from him. She reached up, her hand sliding into the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling his face down to hers. And he has a father, she whispered against his lips. Let's keep it that way. She kissed him. It wasn't soft. It tasted of copper and whiskey and impending violence. It was a seal on a blood pact. When they broke apart, Lorenzo looked at her with a reverence he had never shown another human being. I'm going to buy you the world after this, he murmured. I don't want the world, Lorenzo. She turned toward the elevator doors, raising the weapon. I just want the quiet after the storm. The chime of the service elevator sounded 30 minutes later. The doors opened. Morty's men poured out, expecting a wounded lion and a frightened girl. What they found was a kill box. Lorenzo and Elena moved in perfect synchronization, a duet of gunfire and shattered glass. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. When the smoke cleared, the penthouse was ruined, the floor slick with the blood of the men who had haunted Elena's nightmares. In the center of the chaos, the elder Morty lay gasping on the floor, looking up at the daughter he had branded. Lorenzo stood back, holstering his weapon. He crossed his arms, giving her the space, giving her the choice. Elena stood over her father. She didn't offer a speech. She didn't cry. She simply aimed. Bang! The silence that followed was absolute. Alina engaged the safety and set the gun down on the ruined bar. She turned to Lorenzo. Her hands were steady. "It's done," she said. Lorenzo walked through the carnage, stepping over the debris of her past. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. He didn't see the daughter of his enemy. He saw the woman who had just helped him conquer the city. "No," Lorenzo said, pulling her into his chest, wrapping his arms around her like bands of iron. "It's just beginning." He looked out the shattered window at the city lights below. They were broken, bloody, and dangerous. But for the first time in his life, Lorenzo De Luca wasn't alone in the dark. "Come," he said, guiding her away from the bodies. "Let's go get our son." Alina rested her head against his shoulder as they walked toward the stairwell. The cage was broken. The secret was out, and the Don had found his equal. The end.